Welcome to another episode of Bourbon and Rum. This is a podcast of two brothers from opposite ends of the spectrum. My name's Kent. I'm a rum drinker, and I'm from the left side of the aisle.
And I'm Kyle. I like bourbon, tend to be a little more conservative. Join us as we explore this experiment. Can two brothers from different sides of the political spectrum have a civil conversation and celebrate our differences?
What are you drinking?
I am drinking 1792 full proof old fashioned. And I was just saying a minute ago, I just got done walking around to golf in the heat and hadn't drank in a little while. And I decided to drink 125 proof big glass of old fashioned. So that's probably not a good plan. How about you? What do you
do this? We do this over Zoom so we can see each other, even though our viewers can't. And I will point out that he's drinking an old fashioned in a big gulp. I'm having a very conventional, just a simple lime daiquiri. Just
nice.
Perfect, kind of an easy, perfect drink for a hot summer day.
Yeah.
Well, we've been blessed with like a unusually high level of craziness in the world the last couple of times we've recorded, and
I know
this is no different. We talked about talking about Iran. So we're recording Saturday, the 21st of June, and as of this moment, I don't think any Americans are involved in the conflict, but that might change even before this is released. So why don't you're far more studied on and aware of kind of the defense and geopolitics side. Why don't you kind of lay the landscape and get us into this?
Yeah, well, been trying to do some research. I didn't want to look like Ted Cruz on a podcast. I don't know if you saw that this week with him. And do you see that with him and Tucker Carlson? Oh, you got to see it. Look it up on YouTube. And typically it would be a friendly interview, and Tucker Carlson's, Ted Cruz is like, well, I want regime change in Iran, and Tucker Carlson's like, oh, well, what does that look? What can you tell me about Iran? He's like, Tucker's like, well, how many people live in Iran? He's like, oh, I don't know. Like what's the population? He's like, well, I don't know what the population is. He's like, what's the ethnic mix? Well, like he didn't have any answers and looked like an idiot. And I certainly wouldn't say it's got to be regime change. I think we think it would be nice. I mean, those guys don't seem particularly friendly to the West, but I think you got to be careful what you wish for. I mean, obviously, I think, and I don't know that the Israelis, look, the Israelis are trying to defend themselves, and you've got Iran's proxies in and about Israel between, Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, and you got all these people that Iran funds, which is kind of an interesting thing. Just the whole thing, like Iranians aren't Arabs, yet they're fascinated with the Arab world. They're funding all these Arab movements. And, I think this is the other thing I found interesting too. Like, I think everybody makes it like, well, it's a Muslim versus Jew thing. But, there's Jews that live in Iran, and it's actually a protected minority. So I think it's the Zionist, it's the colonial style land grab that, and I don't know. I mean, it's hard to diagnose because these people seem obviously on the fringe, but like it's that colonial land grab of somebody coming in and taking land from you and saying, this is our place. But what's weird is like Iranians are pissed about it. Well, they don't really have any tie to Palestine. Palestine are these Arabs. Mm-hmm. It's funny. The rest of the Arab world doesn't care. That's what's so strange about this. Like Iran is funding these people to go after Israel, yet like the Gulf nations, I mean, they signed an accord. You can fly nonstop Dubai to Tel Aviv. They're not like pissed about the Arab situation. So it's the whole thing, and I don't pretend to know much, but just as I've researched, I don't think it's as simple as everybody wants to boil it down to in a newsflash, like, oh, well, it's a religious thing. Well, not completely. And it's a, well, we need a different regime. And it's like, well, we tried regime change in 1953, um, because the there was a popular, this is what was really interesting in studying the history of Iran. Like up until, so from like 25 on, the Shah family, so it was like a royal family running the place, and then they appointed, like they had like a prime minister, but the prime minister didn't really have any power. And then, but in the early 50s, after they discovered oil, there's this prime minister. I have his name written down here somewhere, Megada or something like that. No, it's probably not important, but people know who it is. But this guy was like, decided to nationalize the oil industry. And the oil industry, it was like the Iranian
Saudi
British,
Aramco. No, I'm sorry, not
it was a
Aramco. Yeah,
Rio or something. It was the precursor of BP. And they were milking it and making all this money. Well, the prime minister's like, no, screw this. We need to make this Iranian. So he nationalizes it, and he does he gets more and more power, and the Shah becomes kind of an afterthought. And actually, what's crazy about it is at that point in time, early 50s, it's basically a constitutional monarchy. It's basically England today. Like there's a royal, he doesn't really have any power. The prime minister's running the show, and then in comes the CIA.
And it was a stable, if not perfect, a stable, functional, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy.
Yeah. And then, the CIA and MI6 come in, or no, the CIA, yeah, the MI6, the British, and they come in and they're like, well, screw this. We're going to put the Shah back in power. And they imprison this Megada guy, or Mediga, I have to look up his name, but they wind up imprisoning him and exiling him. And they put the Shah back in power. Hey, we're back to business. BP is making tons of money and everybody's happy. And it was stable, it sounds like. But, the Shah's living in these awesome palaces and running the show, and it's a dictatorship. And then, fast forward to 79, when these students take over the U.S. Embassy and hold the hostages. And I don't know, people will be angry with me for the way I'm telling this, because I'm telling the way I'm reading it. I'm sure there's opinions on both sides. Like, I'm probably not doing everything justice, but, they come in and they're like, the guy running the show right now is living in these opulent palaces. He's a dictator. He's in charge of everything. We want to take this back to, to our religious upbringing, a humble roots type of a thing. And so they install the Ayatollah Khomeini, and the many of the people feel like the Ayatollah is like this man of the people. He's for the poor. He swears off materialistic living. It's back to like a conservative Muslim place. And then you fast forward, and now there's his successor. And I think in what's, you see the polling in Iran, and most of the people, like 70% of the people, are like, we don't want a theocracy running them. But I think what happens is they went in with idealistic, like, hey, we're going to get rid of the king. We're going to get this guy who's going to live like a pauper, like the Pope, and is going to love everybody and take care of us. Well, the Ayatollah now is worth like billions of dollars, and he's probably worth more than the Shah ever was, or his family. And he has this, oh, like, yeah, I'm going to take care of everybody. But the reality is he's killing, tens of thousands of his own people over the 40-year reign, compared to the Shah. I mean, the Shah wasn't the nicest guy. I mean, he killed a couple thousand people, but this guy's killed, tens of thousands of his own people. So, and then if you think about the nuclear situation, I mean, the way I'm reading it, it's like Kim Jong-il over here. It's like they know everybody hates them. That I don't know if they're that self-aware, but you'd think they know enough to know, like, their people don't like them and the rest of the world doesn't like them. So you better have something.
Right.
And so we're going to have this nuke, and it feels like, these guys running the UAE and Oman and these other places, they're like, they've they figured out a way. They're totalitarian dictators too, but they figured out a way to make nice with everybody and be wealthy, and that's their thing, But it's like these guys, and honestly, I mean, the good thing about these places like the Gulf nations, they figured out how to run a country so that it doesn't suck. I mean, honestly, if I'm looking at the Ayatollah, it's like they don't know how to do it other than through brute force and killing people. And the place doesn't run very well, and everybody hates them. So it's like a nuke's all they got to save their ass.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I've read that I'll add to the pile on that. The nuclear program in Iran was started in the 70s by the U.S.
Oh,
I'm sure it was one of those, atoms for peace deals, which is great. And I'm actually, a huge proponent of nuclear power, and that was the predicate behind it. But, we absolutely gave them a head start. And I'm not going to try to America bash, but I gotta say the history of the 20th century is littered with us being kind of naive about how the world works and rolling the dice on regime change. Like we thought we had it all set. We had this guy, we had our man there. And so, yeah, we're happy to share you know, nuclear intelligence. Nobody ever imagined that these students could overthrow a country. And I think I've mentioned before, I've been reading about Vietnam and how we were like, oh yeah, we'll just regime change the place. You you roll in the dice on something, you don't know what you're going to get with that. So I do think that I think that you probably hit the nail on the head. They got oil money and they got the possibility of a nuclear weapon. And those are the only real things that give them leverage at the table. I also think related, kind of an undercurrent of some of the things that you said, I was reading about the Shah. So here's an interesting tidbit. Um, Agriculture in Iran it's very mountainous and very arid. And so it's not terribly in places unlike Utah. And Utah State University, a land grant university that I worked for a number of years, actually before the revolution had, like for 20 or 30 years, a really robust exchange program with Iran. There were all kinds of people that came and went from Utah State, including, and I met him one time, but I can't say like we were buds, but the last Shah's ambassador to the ambassador to the United States of Iran when the revolution happened was a gentleman who was an alumnus of our school and had been a donor and a celebrated person. And he was actually the Shah's son-in-law before he divorced his wife. So my little brush with greatness. But the Shah was all about celebrating, Cyrus the Great, and the Persian Empire was a huge player
yeah.
before, 400 or 500 years before Christ's time. And so I think that you see this with countries that have kind of this is a really broad brush, so maybe it's not appropriate, but there's like we used to be something. We were a contender.
Yeah.
And, when you're the home base of the Persian Empire, you kind of, there's a little bit of like, and then now the tables have turned. You look at the roulette wheel of geopolitics, and you're left with oil, and that's
Well,
it.
the other thing I was researching, and again, any historians that listen to our podcast, it's fine to call me an idiot. I probably am butchering a lot of it. But what I found really fascinating was understanding the differences between the Sunnis and the Shiites.
Mm-hmm.
And, my understanding is Muhammad dies late 600s AD. And you can test this, but basically the Shiites wanted his descendants to basically run the show. It's almost like a line to Muhammad is running everything versus the Sunnis wanted more like hey, we're going to select a leader type of a thing,
Mm-hmm.
a consensus leader. And it's so as you fast forward, there is a somewhat of a tendency of a Shiite majority to more want kind of a religious leader in charge. Now, it doesn't happen always. I mean, there's examples on both sides of Shiite Sunni versus some are theocracy, some aren't. Like actually, like Afghanistan is actually Sunni, and they've got a.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I was reading that said like, yeah, Afghanistan Sunni, and they have a theocracy, but like the leader is more of like a military strongman, not so much. I mean, yeah, they're saying it's more like a power thing than it is like a earnest religious thing. I don't know any of them are an earnest religious thing, but I guess where I'm going with that is you think about, and we obviously differ about the current administration. What I'm hopeful of, what Trump talks about is wanting to make deals, and I hope that he is actively pushing for that, because to me, the best outcome of this situation would be some type of negotiated deal, rather than some kind of broad brush exercise of regime change. But I guess when you start thinking about, I think in Trump's world, what he's trying to give these leaders is a vision of like, hey, you could be like Dubai. You could be rich and wealthy and everything's cool. But if you're a Shiite and your thing is you want this more of a, well, I mean, most of the people don't want a theocracy, but I guess if there's this tendency to want a more heavy religious leader, like that materialism is exactly what they don't want, or
Right.
like, and maybe the people do, but like if you're trying to appeal to the Ayatollah, like, hey man, we could build condos here, it'll be great, it probably doesn't motivate him.
So I think this is a really interesting one of those like diagonals that runs through American politics. We had a deal. I will point that out. We had a deal, and if you didn't like the deal, that's fine. But
Well,
we
the deal
well
didn't address the nuclear program was the problem.
well. So I don't think they're going to make a deal that addresses the nuclear program. I think that's the bottom line. If you want a deal, you're going to have to you're going to have to land somehow short of we're blowing up all of our centrifuges, which is what it would take to impede their program, right? And so, yeah, if there's a deal to be had that involves them capitulating on their nuclear, the thing is that it is literally underground. So any rational actor faced with the situation they're in right now is going to be like, oh, yes, President Trump, we want a deal. We'll make a deal. We'll give you everything. We'll give you the keys to our. And meanwhile, you've moved all the stuff underground. I don't see them other than by force relinquishing their nuclear capability. I hope I'm
Right.
wrong, but so. And I think that of all of the things that you can do with Israeli missiles, all the things you can do with B-2s that are being forward deployed, I don't know if you saw that today.
Yep.
Um, you can do a whole lot of stuff, but you can't blow up nuclear plants that are built inside mountains. And so I don't know. Like I don't know
We'll
that the
see.
military solution is going to work. But I think that any deal is going to be, their fingers are going to be crossed behind their back. So I don't know what you do. I don't think, I think in the short run, the possibility of Israel attack, forcing them to a bargaining table is high. That's a high likelihood. Whether the deal's in earnest or not, I think we don't know.
I guess the other thing to think about is what's their power situation right now. I mean, honestly, the best regime change would be not by the CIA, but by the Iranian people. And it's a high percentage that don't want a theocracy in charge. And I don't know, would it be interesting to see how could you get to a point where their rule is so weakened that you establish an in for like a viable in for an alternative to make a play
Yeah.
internally.
But again, you draw from the deck and you don't know what you're going to get. I guess my point is that,
but I'm not. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not saying you go install somebody, but it's kind of like, I guess what I'm saying, or is it more like the Soviet Union? Good example. Like you basically starve it to death, and then that's not a good analogy. You get it to where you make it to where it's not viable on its own.
yeah. I honestly think that from what I know about the place, I do think that the median Iranian citizen is probably way more moderate than the regime that we've had
Yeah.
since 79. So in that sense, yeah, if democracy or some other version of something that respects popular sovereignty, if that's a possibility, it could be good. But so in that sense, maybe this thing with Israel pushes them to the bargaining table. Maybe it pushes an organic regime change. However, I don't care who's in charge. The thing is that I don't think that a massive, deadly attack that goes on multiple days of missiles and airstrikes from Israel makes anybody in Iran say, we really don't need nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Right. No, it's probably the
Like that's
opposite.
the scary thing. You've doubled down. You've put in place something that does have some potential to change the situation, but you've amplified dramatically the anxiety that led them to be motivated to have nuclear weapons in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. The
So,
question is just can you remove that threat? And that's the part that, like you said, it.
in terms of positions, would you support U.S. airstrikes?
I don't know, Kent. I wish I had more. I'm glad I'm not the guy having to make the decision. I mean, I'm a little indecisive. Like I can see, like if you could say, it's one of those things. Like if you could say with certainty, like we've got the thing that will destroy it and be done. Okay, there's some benefit to that. If you could actually eradicate it, but to your point, you don't eradicate it, and then you start a regional conflict that you're now sucked into. I don't like that. We've done that a few times, and it hadn't turned out too well.
At the moment, I think that Trump's the difficulty to pin down Trump. Like I said, when I texted you, write this down. You're not going to find this very often, but I think that in that sense, I think he's probably playing it exactly right. He's not committing to anything. He's going to let this play out a little bit before he shows his cards. And actually, that's probably the smart thing. I don't know if there's a path forward that anybody's going to be happy with. I hope so. But
Yeah, yeah. It's and it's funny. So I told you I was in Helsinki on Thursday night, and I was riding to the airport on Friday, and I'm in Helsinki, Finland, and my taxi driver is Iraqi, immigrated to Finland from Iraq. Interesting character. We talked this whole thing. I mean, wish we could have had him on the podcast. He had some really quality sling, but his thing was like it only works in the Middle East with a strong man. He's like,
mm,
it's nice to think we're going to have a representative government. He's like, it doesn't work. He's like, what you need is a dictator who's an okay guy, like Dubai. Like he even said, because we got talking about Syria, and he had an interesting perspective. He's like, I'm glad they lifted the sanctions. Give him a chance. He said, okay, don't make too much of the guy having been in ISIS. You worry about him. Oh, he's an ex-ISIS. He's like, that part of the world, that's like street cred. That's like, oh yeah, I've been in ISIS. Like, don't screw with me, And but I thought that was really wild. That he's like, you don't want Saddam Hussein. He was a strong man who was a jerk and killed too many people. But I mean, it's like you need a dictator that doesn't kill too many of his own people. That's what we're looking for. It's like it's just a little sad that that's what you're after. But I mean,
yeah.
there's some truth to that because I mean, the most stable societies over there are run by, a fairly nice dictator.
Turn the tables. What about regime change in Israel? Can Netanyahu survive this? And what if the Iron Dome starts to fail a little bit? Iran is not a military pushover. What would it take for people to reject the Netanyahu regime?
Well, I do laugh a little bit. When they talk about the elite Revolutionary Guard, like, okay, they really, we talking about the Green Beret over there. I mean, don't want to be cocky. I'm sure they're a strong military. It was like with the terminology they use for some of these military forces. The same with Iraq, the elite Revolutionary Guard. Like that's just like the guy that joins the military. Well, you're in the Revolutionary Guard. But I did one of the things, it certainly is concerning. And I was reading an article in the failing New York Times, as Donald Trump would like to say, but I did read the New York Times, and it was talking about, I mean, there's a limited number of missiles, and that there is concern over you can run out of missiles. But what's also interesting is a number of missiles that are coming out of Iran keep going down and down and down. I think they're
Hmm.
running out of missiles too.
Well, what a horrible thing that you're betting your country's stability on they run out of missiles before we do, you know? I do think that Israel's ability to control airspace probably is a huge,
Well,
like that alone's a big deal.
they pretty much decimated the Iranian Air Force. They don't really have
Yeah.
anything left. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting few weeks, months. How about you? What would you do in this situation? You're in charge. You're the president. What would you do, Ken?
I honestly think I think what he ultimately does, I'm probably going to hate, but I think for 2 weeks, Trump saying, "Well, we're going to look at it." I think I'd probably do exactly that for 2 weeks. To just see where this goes. If there's a clear winner, that's going to show pretty quick. If this is going to devolve to a stalemate, you got to have a different plan. I would be really uncomfortable committing U.S. assets. And I'm rolling that in my head. In a place with secure airspace, a B-2 bomber is pretty safe.
Back to our defense budgeting reason. If we'd have built the next bomber unmanned, then who gives a crap? Let her
Yeah.
rip.
Yeah. It's really like this to me, of all the things that have happened in the last 10 years, is maybe the most interesting. You talk about strange bedfellows.
Yes.
Because I was a critic of the Bush administration's invasion of Iraq was the straw that pushed me out of the Republican Party. And, there's a lot more to it than that. But, I thought that was a mistake. I thought it was a mistake even before the lack of weapons of mass destruction showed up. And, it still might have been stuff that was there that we didn't see, but I thought it was overly aggressive. I thought it was unnecessary. And I tend to think about these things, not about what happens in the next year or two, but what happens with the next generation when the kids that are right now seeing buildings bombed, when they're the leaders, how does that affect perception of the United States? Because nobody's a threat to us right now. Some are. I don't know. Other than China, we've talked about Russia. Again, strike me down if I'm wrong. Yeah, you got nukes, but you got nukes that are 40 years old and, are they even fueled, So I don't, Iran is not an existential threat to us right now, but Iran plus 30 years might be.
I was reading this thing. There is a theory that Trump's playbook, and you'll laugh at this because I think you think Trump's stuff is basically random, but I forget the name of this theory, this concept. I need to do the research.
Is it Nixon's madman theory?
No, it is a concept of a regional line of trade from the US to Europe to the Middle East through Iran, Iraq, all the way to India, like clearing a path of trade normalcy all the way to the east to counteract China from the other side. It's like a
Hmm.
regional trade balancing, like rebalancing to where like everybody's in lockstep from the US to Europe to Asia versus China, which is kind of dominating the other way. I'm totally butchering the explanation. I got to find this thing, but it was
I think I get
talking
the
about,
concept. Yeah.
but it's talking about like why he's like the socializing with Pakistan and trying to touch that and trying to work this and he's trying to entice them all into trade because the thought is if you could get this trading corridor that would be a way to combat China. I don't know. It may be complete BS, but it was a really intriguing thing. I'll see if I can find it and put it on there. But
Well, again, I think I can guess what the point is. Although, what's it going to be like to maintain a coalition that includes the U.S., Europe, Pakistan and Iran. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like,
Well, I don't know that it's like an ally thing, but it's like people that would work together and trade together. Like the whole point of the Abraham Accords, like these people can travel freely. Like
yeah,
it's not like barriers between each other. But I mean, you know, trying to solve all these motivations, it's like I was telling you, I watched a travel video on Iran from 2009. It was really interesting, learn about the culture and talked on history and stuff. It's a Rick Steves in 2009. He did a video. It's really good. But like the people are all like, we love Americans, they're like really nice people. And, it wasn't like propaganda. It was just like he's out there and people are friendly. But then, the buildings say there's a building in Tehran and it's an American flag with bombs dropping, like death to America. And then there's, these guys are praying in a mosque and there's big signs, death to Israel. And it's like, like the regular Joe on the street, they're not wearing Death to America T-shirts, but the government is,
right. Well, I don't know. The most dangerous thing to me would be for Trump to throw all of his support behind Netanyahu. I mean, I would say that standing back, if there's a risk of an ally being harmed, if they run out of defensive missiles, yeah, okay. But I would paint a pretty bright line between us and Israel on that. Now, of course, there's very few public policy issues on which I wouldn't paint a bright line between the U.S. and Israel.
well, that's one of the things that they've talked about in the news. He hasn't been, I mean, he's
Mm-mm.
supportive, but he hasn't been like lockstep. There was a lot of discussion, a recent trip where he didn't stop in Israel, like
Right.
he's keeping them close, but not too close. It does seem like there's an intentional element there. Like, I don't know how you play that.
Well, my criticism is well known, but this is the thing about which I am least outraged about Trump since he took office. And I hope it goes well. I hope he can find a way to split the difference and work toward peace. I don't think this is good. I don't think it's good long term, but I think it's really bad if we go all in and we double down on back in Israel. You go, Benjamin, whatever you want. I think that would be a mistake.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm glad I'm just some jackass that can drink bourbon and talk on a podcast and not in charge, because that's and and that's the thing that I don't know. You watch that Cruz interview. It's like any side who sits here and anybody in the political spectrum who like definitively says, "Well, I know the answer to this. I'm not going to trust you," because like I don't think anybody knows what the hell the answer is. I mean, it's too complex, and and I feel like that's the thing that people were frustrated with Bush is he just got this. Well, you're either for us or you're against us. Well, you're against us. Well, screw you. We're going to come fight you. Like
Right.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. It's a complicated world. I am just so immersed in the kind of the mistakes of the past chapter. Again, Vietnam, man, I've read two books in the last month on that. And like every single turn, like if you would think this through, play this out 3 or 4 years, it is not what you want to do. And yet we just keep going down the same path. It was
What
just
if so? What about this? What if Trump went to Congress, joint session of Congress, and said, "I want you to consider declaring war on Iran," or like I don't know how he'd characterize it, but like I want you to debate this. I
mm,
want a government. I want our government to decide, because that's how it's supposed to work, right? I mean, you're supposed to go to Congress and like they decide whether we're going to go to war or not with the president. Like, how does that really? It hadn't
well,
happened since
and
World War
and
II, right?
my office got 120,000 phone calls, and your office got 40,000 calls in favor. And yeah, I mean, the closest you get to a referendum from America. It's an
Yeah,
interesting idea. It's oddly non-polarizing, though, for this country, I think, or obliquely polarizing. I mean, there's a little bit of MAGA rebellion happening on well, Tucker Carlson and some others really, really uptight about it. And here I'm not praising him, but I am not actively condemning every word that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth in this. So it's interesting times.
Yeah. Now, we don't have this much time, but I would love to know have you studied Ezekiel at all?
A little bit, yeah.
Like when it talks about, like the prophecy around Israel and the countries involved. And have you ever kind of laid that out? Like some of the terms for some of the country. Well, another day, I'd love to get your take, because as you research about this, people say, well, like there's a reference to one country. Well, that is a reference to Russia. Like I don't know how they come up with these, like generalized locations of places. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. I guess my take on that would be that I think that the books were written at a time with a different voice and kind of descriptive of what had been. I think, in my mind, so a lot of, I take a lot of the books that are proposed to be prophetic, and Ezekiel's one, and I think it was written at a later time than the setting claims to be, and that's the more the liberal view, the less the scriptural inerrant view. But I think either way, the interesting thing is, like in some ways, if you take my view that it was written descriptively about things that were happening in those empires at a later date than the book is dated to, and it looks prophetic. But the most interesting thing is that whether it was written prophetically in advance of what happened with the captivity or after the captivity, descriptive of what happened. The interesting thing is that it's the circle of these things are applicable enough that now in 2025 you can look at the geopolitics and you can be like, well, yeah, the army from the north is going to come here.
Well, the way they characterize the different countries, I was watching this thing that kind of brought it together, and it basically, talks about Israel being scattered and then comes back together, and it's many believe is now where they are, and the region of where Russia is today, Iran, and Syria would combine forces with those, and Libya and Sudan. Because they call out all the names of these territories. So then it's like, okay, well, how's Libya and Sudan and Russia? I mean, see Russia and Iran, and the thought about it is there would be this battle that would take place at the Syrian border with Israel. So it's pretty wild to kind of lay out, and you wonder, like, how much of what's going on is part of some long-standing prophecy that all this stuff's going to happen, and how much of it is just it's because some assholes in charge and screwing things up. You know what I mean? Like, how much of this is
Yeah.
Some long orchestrated, all these things coming together, and how much of it is just bad people or people that have just made bad decisions.
Or like I say, a third alternative that what you read in the Bible is a description of what was there, and it's this rhyming, repeating wheel of the same kind of stuff that just rolls over and over and over again in predictable ways. Inevitability of these conflicts, which is sad to think about. But
it's too bad that our little podcast couldn't get the Ayatollah. Like, we could have a conversation with the Ayatollah, figure out what he wants. Then we'll have a conversation with Netanyahu. I think we could figure it out. If we could just get if we could get an hour with each of these people, we lay down all their wants and desires, and surely the two of us can figure this out.
Maybe we task the producer with trying to get a hold of Netanyahu and Khamenei, and we may have to. The logistics is going to be tough to get those all on, time zones and stuff.
She's really good. But I mean, if anybody I know could get the Ayatollah on the phone, it's her. Now we got a translation issue we got to work through.
Hey, thanks for joining us on this episode of Bourbon and Rum Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Remember to subscribe on your favorite platform and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us keep the good spirits flowing.
And we invite you to join this conversation. Follow us on our Facebook page. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to hear.
And until next time, cheers.